I guess for someone that's not involved in the sport initially, they don't really know how hard players work at this level, and I think they think that they just go down to the courts, throw the ball around, get out on the court, play their game, and that's it. But it's a lot more involved than that.
I think there's a necessity to realise that there's always learning opportunity with respect to fitness. To rely on just your natural talent, what you've done in the past, perhaps isn't good enough in this modern game.
Netball places many demands on a player's fitness, so to perform at the highest possible level, a player needs to follow a well-planned fitness training program.
We do a lot of work on plyo work, trying to build power in our legs. We look at our speed, our fitness, our strength, and then on top of that we've got to do our specific netball work as well.
Step one in designing any training program is to identify the aim of the program. We already know that this program is aimed at fitness training for netball, but there are other things we need to know as well. Is the purpose of the program to mould elite-level national players, or to give the local third division team a bit of extra puff? In this video, we will design a training program suitable for state-level 19 and under players. Players at this level are highly committed and willing to put in considerable time to achieve a high level of performance, but are still not full-time professionals and have studies and other commitments to fulfil. We also might assume that in some cases their bodies are still not fully developed, and so are not always capable of performing at the same levels as older, matured players. The training program must specifically address the needs of the game and of the players concerned. And Queensland with the ball in the centre, onto the wing, but an intercept of Phoenix puts them into attack. The ball, strong ball across the circle, and McMahon on the baseline, and Phoenix on the board. Netball is a challenging, unpredictable sport that places demands on many aspects of physical fitness. And Phoenix being patient with the ball, lots of options through the centre court, onto Avellino, bounce across the circle. A netballer needs both speed and agility to initiate attacking and defensive strategies, to beat an opponent in evasive actions, and when receiving or intercepting a pass. Looking down court for Wilson, strong pass up and well taken Wilson under the ring, and ball in for Queensland. The netballer requires both strength and power, upper body and shoulder strength for effective shooting and passing, and explosive power for when leading to the ball. And a sensational intercept from McMahon, amazing flexibility. Phoenix with the ball on the circle. Good flexibility allows players to move easily and freely. It also helps prevent injury and has been shown to reduce muscle soreness and enhance recovery after hard training. And the ball in the centre court, into the wing. Oh, and a great chase up from McMahon, but off Southby and Queensland back into attack. Netballers require well-developed anaerobic capacity for intense sprint efforts used in activities such as leading, chasing and attacking in the goal circle. And Southby with the ball, puts it in for Phoenix. It doesn't look too happy. I think it's been a big game. It's the final quarter. Netballers need good aerobic endurance in order to sustain prolonged low-intensity efforts and to recover from shorter, more intense bursts of activity. A game analysis involves finding out what a player actually does during a game. For example, how far the player runs, how intense this running is, and how long the player gets to rest for between bursts of activity as well as the skills she performs. This kind of information can then be used to work out the energy systems and fitness components used in the sport, which, when trained, will improve performance. One method used to analyse player activity is to calculate the work-to-rest ratio. The best way to do this is to record the details of one player's activity observed from a videotaped match. Work-to-rest ratios are calculated using a stopwatch to time each work or activity period along with each rest period. A table can be drawn up and consecutive periods of work and rest recorded. For example, 2 seconds of work, such as a sprint, jump or shuffle, is recorded with the letter W. In the next 5 seconds, the player rested, denoted by the letter R. Rest would be defined as any movement less than a slow jog. Most periods of work for a netball player, regardless of their position, are less than 10 seconds. Work periods and rest periods are totalled, and the two totals compared to form a ratio.
I think the simplest game analysis that you can do is to get an idea of work to rest ratios for individual positions, and it's the simplest and probably the most appropriate for designing a beginning program. If you know the player's work to rest ratio and you know the style of play the coach wishes to have, you can either change their work to rest ratio through an appropriate training regime, or you can re-emphasise what they need to be training towards.
Work to rest ratios are most useful when used in conjunction with more detailed analysis. A comprehensive study of international netballers was conducted by Otago several years ago, which looked at activity patterns, types of work and work to rest ratios. The study revealed, among other things, that each position has a unique activity pattern. Wing attacks do the most sprinting, while centres are the most active, but at lower intensities. Defensive players spend the highest percentage of time shuffling, while the majority of passes are made by the centre, wing attack and goal attack, in that order. For players in all positions, the majority of work is performed with a work-to-rest ratio of 1:3 or greater. Therefore, netball training should develop the ATP-PC system through short interval sessions using a 1:3 work-to-rest ratio. However, training should also develop a solid aerobic base so that recovery during rest periods is as rapid and efficient as possible. Heart rate analysis is another common way of measuring intensity of effort. This involves the player wearing a device during the game that measures the heart rate. A heart rate of over 85% of the maximum indicates anaerobic effort, while a heart rate of between 75 and 85% of the maximum would mean aerobic activity is taking place. A heart rate of less than 75% of the maximum indicates recovery. Specific studies of elite players using heart rate analysis have been made by sports science organisations over the years, always with a view to improving training programs. In one study, the results were used to compare the different heart rates measured during a game to those measured during training. Heart rates were first divided into zones of varying intensity, Zone 1 for greater than 95% maximum heart rate, down to Zone 4 for less than 75% maximum. Over the course of one game, the heart rate of this wing defence spent a given percentage of time in each of the 4 zones. During the same player's training session, however, a different proportion of time was spent in each heart rate zone. The analysis indicated that training needed adjustment to more closely approximate the game situation. Another study used results of heart rate analysis to compare the physical demands placed on players in different court positions. The results of one player studied, who played goal attack in one game and goal shooter in another, clearly show the different physical demands placed on players in different court positions. Training for players at this level of netball should reflect these differences.
One of the problems with scientific game analysis is that it's good at giving you times and distances and heights and that sort of thing. However, it doesn't necessarily give you an idea of the quality of what the player's doing. So definitely there are limitations to the scientific process, yeah.
While game analysis reveals specific energy systems and fitness components critical in the sport we are training for, Step 3 involves selecting fitness tests to measure these. Fitness test results establish players' abilities and monitors improvements over the course of the training program. The tests conducted for each fitness component must remain constant and should try to replicate as closely as possible actions performed in the sport being played. So the best test for aerobic endurance, for example, would be the shuttle run beat test, rather than a 1600 metre run time trial. While the 1600 metre run involves aerobic endurance, the shuttle run more closely replicates the stop-start nature of player movement patterns specific to netball and can be undertaken on a netball court. The following tests have been developed jointly by Australian sporting and netball authorities, The acceptable standards described are for senior players.
The 10-metre test is used to measure a player's explosive acceleration speed when moving in a straight line. The player performs the test from a stationary position. They're required to sprint explosively for 10 metres, and it's very important that they continue sprinting past the 10-metre line so that there's no deceleration when they perform the test. The sit and reach test is a standard measure for the flexibility of the lower back and the hamstrings, and this test was revised recently to allow for those players that have exceptionally long bodies and long arms. The test involves a sliding scale. The player sits upright with their arms outstretched in front of them, and the zero mark is actually set at the end of the player's fingertips. The player leans as far forward as possible over the measurement device to record how far they can actually reach, and the measurement's now recorded in positive centimetres and not negative as was previously the case. The 505 agility test assesses a player's ability to change direction quickly. The player must sprint past the timing line to the pivot line, where they plant either the right or left foot, turn sharply and accelerate quickly out of the pivot back past the timing line. The time is actually recorded from the 5 metre line through to the pivot line and back beyond the 5 metre line again. The vertical jump test is an excellent test for measuring a player or an athlete's explosive power of the legs. The player is required to make a mark on the wall with their fingertips, which have been dipped in magnesium chalk. The height jumped is the measure from the zero mark to the fingertip mark on the wall. The 7-level sit-up test is used to measure a player's abdominal strength. There's 7 stages to the test, and it becomes progressively more difficult with each level of the test. The aim of the test is to perform as many of the 7 levels as possible. Levels 6 and 7 actually use a weight, making them the most difficult levels of the test.
Level 1.
The beep test is an outstanding test for assessing a player's cardiovascular endurance, and the stop-start nature of the test makes it very specific to what actually occurs in a game of netball. The player is required to run continuously back and forth along a 20-metre track, keeping up with a series of beeps made by the audio cassette. The beeps become more frequent, and the players drop out of the test when they can no longer keep up with the series of beeps being made by the cassette. The medicine ball chest pass test measures a player's shoulder and arm strength. The player sits with their back upright against a wall. The ball is held at chest level, and using a lob pass they throw the ball as far as they can. The distance recorded is measured from the base of the wall to where the ball lands.
Step 4 involves the selection of training methods, which should replicate the kinds of demands placed on the body during a game. This is called specificity. The training method should stress the specific energy system, fitness components and muscle groups used in the game of netball. This is quite different to the movements required by a footballer, for example, who is required to run relatively large distances at a time, or a rower who relies almost exclusively on upper body strength to perform at a peak level. The training methods and activities carried out must also be specific to the needs identified by fitness test results. In particular, weaknesses should be specifically trained.
Specificity refers to the fact that there's no one fitness. There's a fitness that's particular to your game, particular to your position, and in fact particular to your coach's style and your style of play. So specificity would suggest that you need to program your players with respect to their training so that they're getting the optimum training for their particular needs in the game.
Go.
It is both practical and efficient to divide the overall training program into sessions that focus on particular aspects of physical fitness. An interval training program will develop speed and endurance and can be done anywhere there is a large space, as it involves running with very little equipment. A weight training program, on the other hand, develops muscular strength, power and endurance components and would be carried out in a gym with a variety of specialised equipment. A plyometrics program develops agility and explosive, powerful movements in netball and typically involves setting up some equipment.
Key element for a novice training program would be to concentrate on core stability, particularly midriff stability and the deep muscles of the back. I think sometimes try to put too much into early or try to prescribe advanced exercises too early. A glaring example is the use of plyometric exercise. Using plyometric exercise for people who have got a training age of practically zero in the gymnasium is dangerous and can be counterproductive, cause injuries, etc.
Interval training is ideally suited to netball. This involves a short burst of activity at maximum intensity, followed by a rest period, followed by another burst of activity, and so on. This type of training closely replicates a game of netball and can train a number of fitness components, including speed, agility, anaerobic power and local muscular endurance. Each burst of activity is called a repetition, while the rest period between each burst is called the recovery interval. A group of repetitions and rest intervals is called a set. So one element of a training program might be a set of 10 20-metre sprint repetitions with 30 to 40 second recovery intervals between each one. Length of sprints, duration of recovery intervals, the number of repetitions in a set and the number of sets can be varied to alter the stress put on the different energy systems. Short distances with long recovery intervals will tend to train the ATP-PC system, while longer distances with shorter recovery intervals will train the lactic and aerobic systems. An extensive weight training program will be necessary to develop strength, power and endurance in all the major muscle groups. The weights program will involve sets of weight and resistance exercises. Resistance exercises, such as incline sit-ups, use gravity acting on the body to provide resistance. To work out the amount of weight to lift for a particular exercise, the repetition maximum of the athlete for that exercise needs to be determined. The repetition maximum, or RM, is the maximum weight that can be lifted a certain number of times. So to find out your RM for 5 repetitions of bench presses, you need to try doing bench presses at different weights until you find the weight which allows you to complete 5 presses but no more. A variety of stretches of all the major muscle groups will be necessary to prepare for training and to enhance flexibility. Skills training, which will involve activities such as passing and shuffling drills, will also act as a low-level aerobic workout. The training program needs to be planned out over the course of the year, which can be divided into a number of separate phases. These are general preparation, specific preparation, pre-competitive, competitive and transition. The critical factor in planning the program is the length and timing of the competitive season. For a state-level netballer, this period will last for 20 weeks, including the finals period, and will start in March. The purpose of the first 3 phases is to use progressive overload to improve appropriate fitness components and energy systems. During the competition phase, the emphasis is on maintaining fitness levels attained during the previous phases. This is because if the body has been stressed through progressive overload during training, it will not be able to perform as well during a game. The transition phase after the season is the body's chance to have a rest.
When you stick to a plan and you do put in a good pre-season, then you are sort of prepared a lot more, like I've said before, for the oncoming season, both physically and mentally. You've got to make sure that your body is right. And I guess when you stick to that plan and you've got someone controlling what you're doing pre-season, then you are doing the right things. You are getting your body ready. You're looking at your fitness levels, your strength, your power and your speed.
Periodisation involves using rest periods to allow the body to adapt and recover. This has been found to be very helpful in improving fitness levels. A periodisation plan can be made by dividing each phase of the training program into macro cycles, which are periods of 4 to 6 weeks. Each week within a macro cycle is called a microcycle. During each microcycle of the first 3 phases, the load for each exercise should be increased by 5 to 10% until the last week of the macrocycle. During this last week, called the adaptation week, the load should be decreased to about 60% of the previous week's load. During the competition phase, there may only be a few adaptation weeks, as the focus is mainly on skills and matches rather than increasing strength and fitness. However, there should be at least 1 week, or microcycle, in which the athlete does not do any form of strength training and only a very low level of other fitness work. This adaptation and recovery period not only helps the body, but also serves as a mental recovery time. Fitness testing of the athlete should be conducted at the end of each macrocycle, after the low-intensity recovery week, when the players are most rested. This will allow the test to indicate the true benefits of the previous macro cycle. The final step in creating a training program involves planning the exercises each training session will consist of. After all, you can't run a macro cycle or lift a repetition. Following is a sample training program for a state-level 19 and under netball team. The main objective of the general preparation phase is to involve the maximum number of muscle groups with the goal of preparing the muscles, ligaments, tendons and joints to endure the following training phases. Traditionally, building a good aerobic base was emphasised in this phase. Recent studies have shown that this actually inhibits the development of speed and strength components in muscles.
Some coaches are still a little shy about dropping the long, slow distance type training at the beginning of the season and trying to get and going in favour of the sprinting. What we've done is we've gone straight sprinting the whole season, including pre-season. But that's a change that's still occurring, and I think that's a major one.
Another reason for delaying the development of aerobic endurance is to reduce the risk of chronic overuse injuries that can occur due to running on hard surfaces early in the pre-season. Most young athletes would still have a base-level aerobic fitness from the previous year and from other activities that they participate in. Aerobic conditioning will be included at a later stage. During this first stage, training will consist of 2 interval and 2 weight training development sessions per week. The flexibility training will form part of both the interval and weight sessions and will be completed during warm-up and cool-down. The interval training program could be performed on Mondays and Thursdays, with each session lasting about 80 minutes. A typical training session could consist of a warm-up, a series of stretches, a series of technique drills, sets of repeated sprints, plyometric drills, basic skills work, such as passing, catching and shooting, and a cool-down and stretch. This sequence will remain the same for all phases. Care must be taken with players' footwear and surface utilised with both sprint and plyometric training to ensure injury-free sessions. The warm-up will consist of 5 to 10 minutes of low-intensity aerobic exercise, such as jogging and court work. Warming up helps prevent injury by reducing viscosity in the muscles and increasing the ability to extend soft tissue. It also improves performance of the muscles in a number of ways, including increasing blood flow and associated oxygen delivery to the working areas. The game-related warm-ups also prepare the player psychologically. A series of stretches of all the major muscle groups is important to help prevent injury and increase ease and range of movement. The technique drills, involving exercises such as high knees, butt kicks and fast feet, help improve running technique, which will make the players as efficient as possible. This will mean that later fitness gains can be converted into the maximum possible improvement in performance levels. These drills also aid the warm-up process. Repeated sprints, involving short, intense bouts, will primarily tax the ATP-PC energy system. The rest periods between bouts will allow for the full recovery of phosphate stores. In the first week of the macro cycle, the interval program will consist of a set of 20 repetitions of 10-metre sprints, with 15-second recovery intervals between repetitions. A set of 15 repetitions of 20-metre sprints with 30-second recovery intervals, and a set of 10 repetitions of 30-metre sprints with 45-second recovery intervals. The interval sprints can be progressively overloaded by increasing the number of repetitions by 5 to 10% each week. In the fourth week of the macro cycle, the number of repetitions should be reduced by about 60%. In this phase, plyometric drills are introduced at a basic level. The drills will consist of bound sprints, in which the player will bound for 10 metres and sprint another 10 metres, lateral rocking bounces, and double leg hops. Skills training will last for about 20 minutes to half an hour and will involve a variety of routines using the netball. The cool down and stretch at the end of the session will be similar to the warm-up and stretch at the start. A low-level aerobic jog will help lactic acid removal and breakdown, while stretching will help prevent muscles and joints from becoming stiff and sore. The weight training program could be conducted on Tuesdays and Fridays, with each session lasting about 45 minutes. These two sessions are enhanced by the plyometric training carried out as part of the interval training program. At an elite level, players normally perform a third weight training session, but at the 19 and under level, plyometric training reduces this requirement. The weight training program will primarily stress the ATP, PC and lactic acid systems. The exercises are aimed at increasing muscle growth, known as muscular hypertrophy, and the development of endurance and strength. Therefore, compound movements which involve more than one muscle group and joint will be used. This will prepare the muscles for more specific exercises later. These training sessions will consist of a warm-up, a series of stretches, strength and endurance exercises, and a cool down and stretch. Players should start warming up with 5 to 10 minutes of aerobic activity, such as riding an exercise bike, and then continue to a series of static stretches of all the major muscle groups. Internal and external rotation movements are done at the beginning of all the weight sessions, in all phases, to increase shoulder and scapular stability. Loads will remain relatively low with these exercises due to the small amount of muscle utilised and the general instability of the shoulder when in this position. In this phase, strength and endurance exercises will consist of 12 repetitions lifting low to medium loads of weight with approximately 1 minute recovery interval. To determine the weight of a low to medium load for 12 repetitions, the player should find out her 14 repetition maximum, which is the maximum load she can lift 14 times in a row without stopping. This amount will be less than she could lift 12 times in a row without stopping, and therefore represents a low to medium load for sets of 12 repetitions. The exercises to be performed are chosen for their compound movements, that is, they involve more than one joint and muscle group. They are mainly non-specific exercises in this general preparation phase. Isolation exercises are not used because they do not reflect the movements performed in a game of netball.
One more after this. Good. Done.
The weight lifted can be increased by 5 to 10% each microcycle to progressively overload. In the last week of the macro cycle, weight lifted should be decreased by 60%. These will be followed by a cool down and stretch.
In the specific preparation phase, we refine the movements so that the exercises the athlete goes through are very game specific, identical to what they'll do in a game, and in general we tend to reduce the weight used and increase velocity and power.
The aim of this phase is to develop a high level of force in the muscles, ligaments and tendons specific to playing the game of netball. Training will start to become more specific in its focus. In Phase 2, the interval program will include sprints with an added agility component. plyometric drills will be further developed and flexibility will also continue to be developed. In this phase, mid-court players could complete an extra aerobic conditioning session based on lower intensity training such as fartlek running, which is loosely defined as the mixing of slow and fast running, often over natural terrain. Training will be conducted on the same days as Phase 1, with the extra session being conducted on Saturdays. At 19 and under level, netballers typically play in more than one court position, and as such, all players should participate in this extra session. Warm-ups, technique drills and stretches should be carried out as in Phase 1. Sprints will be modified to include an agility component with the use of cones spaced at 5 to 10 metres. These are known as shuttle drills. Each shuttle drill session will consist of a set of 5 repetitions of 30-metre shuttles, with 40-second recovery intervals between sprints, a set of 10 repetitions of 20-metre shuttles with 30-second recovery intervals, and a set of 15 repetitions of 10-metre shuttles, with 20-second recovery intervals. Progressive overload will be provided by increasing the number of repetitions by 5 to 10% each week until adaptation week, when repetitions will be decreased by 60%. The plyometric drills will consist of repetitions of 20-metre bounds, lateral rocking bounces, jump, shuffle, jump and shuffle, maximal double leg hops, plyometric push-ups, and finally, unilateral medicine ball passes. During this phase, skills work will also play an important role in training. This training session aims to develop speed via the sprint work, lactic acid tolerance through the reduction of rest periods, and aerobic conditioning via the aerobic system having to deal with the metabolic byproducts of hard training during rest periods. In this way, all 3 energy systems are taxed. The weight training program, moving from general endurance and strength to maximal strength, will emphasise specificity of movement. Load should be increased to high, in fact to repetition maximum, and rest periods should also be increased. With low numbers of repetitions being lifted at repetition maximums, these sessions will primarily stress the ATP-PC system. Rest periods should last 2 to 3 minutes to allow for recovery of PC stores. 2 weight training sessions per week will be conducted as in Phase 1. The exercises to be performed are chosen for their compound movements that attempt to simulate the major gross movement patterns of the game.
That's it.
These include pushing, pulling, jumping, twisting and turning.
That's it. Good. Done.
Progressive overload and periodisation will be achieved by varying weight loads as in the previous phases.
In the pre-competition phase, we're emphasising power almost exclusively, and we're minimising the weight of the implements and getting the player to increase their ability to move quickly and powerfully, but also for their movements to be as quick as possible. In this phase, the particular exercises become very, very specific to the game, and the implements used become very specific to the game.
The purpose of this phase is to convert or transform the gains developed in the preceding phase into competitive sport-specific combinations. In relation to netball, the aim would be to transform maximum strength into reactive strength, speed and power. Speed, agility, flexibility and aerobic endurance will be maintained from here and throughout the competitive season, whilst anaerobic capacity will continue to develop. Training will be conducted on the same days as Phase 2. The interval program uses the shuttle drills for sprint exercises. In addition, the shuttle drills will be specific game-type movements involving all running changes, such as forward, backward and sideways runs, with appropriate directional changes. In the first week of the macro cycle, the shuttle drills will consist of a set of 15 repetitions of 20-metre shuttles, with 30-second recovery intervals between sprints, a set of 15 repetitions of 15-metre shuttles, with 20-second recovery intervals, and a set of 15 repetitions of 10-metre shuttles, with 15-second recovery intervals. Progressive overload will be provided by increasing the number of repetitions by 5 to 10% each week until adaptation week, when repetitions will be decreased by 60%. The plyometric drills will consist of repetitions of single leg speed hops, pitter-pat shuffle and jog in all directions, double leg speed hops, lateral jump, sprint and jog backwards, and finally, medicine ball passes. The weights training program, moving from maximum strength to reactive strength, will emphasise high-speed movement as would be experienced during a game of netball. The load to be lifted should be medium to high, that is, close to repetition maximum, facilitating the development of power, speed and endurance. Rest periods should be in the order of 2 to 3 minutes. This training format will stress the ATP, PC and lactic acid systems. The exercises are chosen for their highly specific compound movements which relate to the main movements in netball, with a combination of alternating and bilateral movements. Fast movement is most important in the selection of exercises in this phase. These movements include running, jumping, pushing, pulling, twisting, turning and passing. Progressive overload and periodisation will be followed as in previous phases.
Competition phase is generally an undulating phase where the program variables are manipulated in such a way that the athlete is not at a constant level throughout the whole season. They have opportunities to increase in various qualities and also to recover from training on a progressive week-by-week basis.
This phase will maintain the fitness gains achieved in pre-season throughout the duration of the playing season. It generally lasts for about 20 weeks. Sets of repeated sprints and shuttle drills are dropped from the program to be replaced by extended skill drills, which should incorporate the fitness components developed over the pre-season period. These drills can be set so they follow a game-specific format, such as court work involving 5 to 20 metre sprints, with and without changes of direction, variable rest periods of 10 seconds to 1 minute, and low to medium intensity efforts, as would be experienced on game day. A plyometric session should be completed once per week, alternating between the sessions designed for phases 2 and 3. This session should be done during the middle of the week to allow for recovery from the previous match and to be ready for the match to come. The sessions may last from 60 to 90 minutes, depending on the player's recovery status from the previous game. For 19 and under state level players who have work and study commitments outside netball, an appropriate weekly schedule would now include only one weight session per week to be performed on Tuesdays and no extra aerobic session on Saturdays. The weight training sessions will be used to maintain both strength and power. Therefore, strength and power sessions should be alternated weekly. A typical in-season weight session would be similar to those used in phases 2 and 3. However, the number of repetitions and sets performed should stay low, while the intensity of the workout should be high. This will help the body maintain strength and power without overstressing the musculoskeletal system, giving skills training and actual competition highest priority.
If a player is fatigued from a game, it's usually central nervous system type fatigue as well as psychological fatigue, and they can make errors in their landings, etc. in training. So we need to be very careful that we don't program a high intensity session straight after a game.
As in the pre-competition phase, the exercises to be performed are chosen for their highly specific compound movements that relate to the main movements in netball.
That's great. Keep going.
Here again, fast movement is most important in the selection of exercises.
very important that players do look after themselves as well in the off-season and probably get off the court and get away from netball and do a little bit more of cross-training. I just want to talk about cross-training. Stay away from a netball court, stay away from a netball, pick up a tennis racket, you know, do a little bit of running, a bit of bike riding, swimming, but just try to stay off your feet on the netball court.
The main goal of this phase is to replenish the body and give the player a mental rest from the rigours of weekly training. Duration of the transition period will be from the end of the competition phase to the start of the new pre-season. The player does not need to undertake any specific training during this period, but should avoid complete inactivity. The emphasis in this phase is to participate in alternative and preferably enjoyable pursuits which will help maintain general fitness and health.
Our approach is one approach, and in National League there are another 7 approaches, and we're all very different.